George Freeman joins us now, former Minister of State at the Science and Technology Department. George, you're a lesser spotted being inside that House of Commons. You're reduced in number. What's it feel like to watch Labour present a legislative agenda and not the Conservatives after all these years?
Well, on the one hand, very humbling, quite humiliating, and a reminder that we didn't just lose this election, we were thrown out unceremoniously. Why? I think not largely because of policy failure, but because of our conduct in office. And the public came to conclude that the Conservative Party was busier and more interested in who should hold the crown than dealing with the really difficult problems that people faced. I happen to think we've left rather a golden economic legacy, but I think this was a conduct rejection election. So I welcome the emphasis that Keir Starmer has put on conduct, standards, integrity, just as Rishi did when he came in. We're clearly a shattered party. We're down to 120 of us. But look, I think we're irrelevant for the next 6 months. My argument has been we need to recognise that, go into a dark room. I'd have a conference with no media. No one cares what we say or think at the moment.
What, Tory conference with no media?
Yep, I'd give free tickets to all the MPs who've lost their seats and all our long-standing members and have an honest conversation about where and when we lost public support, and then have a leadership contest. Having had a Clause 4 moment, I'd like to reconstitute the party, frame it around values. We have to show the public that we've got it, we've heard the message, and make ourselves fit for a 21st century in which there aren't tribal voters. People just want delivery, values, integrity, standards, and public service.
But Mr. Freeman, you are more than a shattered opposition. You are His Majesty's official opposition. You do have a role in Parliament, only with 121 MPs maybe, but you still have a role. When you go through the legislative proposals, where do you think the tensions will be, and what are you going to do to hold this government to account?
Yeah, so we are, but I wanted to start with humility before the opposition. I happen to think Rishi Sunak set a brilliant tone, both in his manner of his acknowledgement speech, but also in his first speeches in the House. We have a very experienced front bench who are more than capable of gently pointing out to His Majesty's government where we suspect they may struggle and where we don't think they've thought things through well enough. My own view, I think there are three things. There's a couple of very interesting and potentially dangerous bear traps. I think the votes at 16 and the talk of reforming the Lords. If they're serious about constitutional reform, as Tony Blair will tell them, that could soak up a vast amount of.
But the votes at 16 weren't actually in the speech.
No, but it was reference to constitutional reform. There's been a lot of talk of it, so we'll see. Secondly, I think the really big area they're going to struggle is on this very top-down, statist approach on planning, on renationalising the railways. Clearly, the system needs reform. I've been one of the loudest voices for reform, but I think it's very. The man from Whitehall knows best. I don't hear much third way imagination here. So on rail, I've made the case for years we should have mutual rail companies, like an East Anglian railway company, integrate the track and the train and let season ticket holders have a share in it. A mutual, so the profit goes back into the system. So I think it's a very old-fashioned, rather Wilsonian approach. There'll be endless committees in Whitehall, very good people, but I think gradually they will realise the problem we realise, which is that earnest meetings in London make very little difference with towns that are really struggling, people reeling from the cost of living. If they succeed, they will pour more box housing for commuters all around the green belts, all around the shires, locking in opposition for years.
Having said that, they have proposed more devolution, so that would give more power to regional governments as opposed to central government.
Metro mayors as well, Camilla, they've said.
And on housing, this is one of the failures, perhaps you could argue, not just of the Tory government but previous Labour government terms, that you didn't deliver enough housing.
No, and I accept that. We delivered far more than Labour did when they were last in office, but still not enough. And again, I've made the case that most counties could have a new town, a big new town, somewhere where you would actually improve the landscape. What we've got to get away from is this legal basis of big developers dumping housing estates, big commuter estates, with no infrastructure, leading to flooding, pressure on public services. We'll have to wait and see. But I think that could boomerang very hard. And the really big one, I knocked on 25,000 doors. The three things people of all parties told me: one, immigration. They want to know our borders are controlled, and Keir Starmer and his team are going to have to deal with it. And if not Rwanda, and if not what we were doing, they're going to have to. Maybe the European Union going to the right on immigration will help him. Maybe. Secondly, NHS. And we've been pouring money into the NHS. The model's broken. It's not broken by Tory cuts. It's broken by a massive centralisation. Huge bureaucracies at DH, NHS England, and very little coming out on the ground. And if Wes Streeting is bold, I think only Labour can really reform the NHS. So that's one to watch, I think. And I wish him well, because if we could localise the NHS, integrate it with care, then he deserves all the cheers. And the last one is, I just think they've confused house dumping with economic growth. And I'm not sure this Labour frontbench has got business, enterprise, innovation, small business in its blood, like the Blair government did. It feels a bit earnest, top-down, statist. And some things respond to that, but business needs to know that they've got a government that really backs enterprise and innovation.
George, one more question, please. You've been in government, you're now in opposition. What's your one piece of advice to Keir Starmer and his cabinet?
Great question. It would be this. Send a very clear message down through the system that ministers, prime ministerially appointed ministers, all ministers, not just cabinet ministers are sovereign. They have the Prime Minister's authority, and reassert cabinet collective responsibility so that all ministers are batting on a team and they are all involved in having a voice. And I fear in the last few years, through the pandemic, through Tory chaos, through Brexit, we've become a rather presidential system in which ministers don't get enough support from their secretaries of state and the machine, the power machine in number 10. And if that doesn't happen, Keir will be the first to get frustrated, because government will be run by a cadre of unaccountable officials. Empower your ministers and send a strong signal of what the priority is. If you have a choice, always go this way. Mine would be responsibility. If you have a choice to give responsibility to people, go that way. But he needs to decide what it is and send it out and reward people who deliver.
George Freeman, a Conservative survivor. Well done speaking above the horse poop scoopers. Thank you so much for joining us on The Daily Tea.
Thank you. Exciting day.